we all see and hear me?
Yes, we can, George, we can.
Evening.
Yes,
thank you to everybody for joining us this evening. Before we make a start on proceedings for tonight's Governance and Audit Committee meeting, a bit of housekeeping, please. If I could remind all participants that the meeting will be recorded and copy archived for future viewing. If all participants could please mute themselves when not speaking to avoid any background noise. If anybody wishes to speak, could you please use the raise hand function? And if you are having any difficulty hearing or being heard when addressing the committee, please either contact me as the chairman or Gareth as the Democratic officer. If you have a webcam, it may be a bandwidth issue, so if you try turning this off and just using the audio function, that may help. Other than that, then, if we make a start on tonight's meeting, I appreciate this is the third time this week some of us have seen each other. It's been quite a packed schedule on that. But if we make a start then with the first item, which is apologies for absence, do we have any apologies?
No apologies, Chair.
Okay, if we move on to the next item then, which is the meeting minutes of the last meeting held on the 20th of July. Do we have any comments or questions that members would like to raise relating to the minutes? I don't see
the minutes, Chair.
Indicating on that. I'm happy to propose they're taken as read and signed off. If somebody could second that, please.
I think Councillor Rodens has already moved the minutes, Chair.
Apologies, I didn't hear that. I will second then. Are we all agreed on that?
Happy to agree and support.
Fantastic. If we move on to item 3 then, which is to receive declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations? Okay, on to item 4 then, which is a reference from Council, which is the Annual Improvement Plan Part 2, and I think Tom is going to take that.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. Good evening, committee. Yes, this is a reference from Council of the Improvement Plan Part 2. We're bringing this to Governance and Audit Committee for 3 reasons this evening, Chair. One, to give your committee final oversight of the end of year performance for the local authority. Secondly, to give you final oversight around the regulatory recommendations pertaining to the local authority, and that's section 7 of the report. And also I wanted to ensure that we highlighted and gave you visibility of the changes which have been introduced as part of the Local Government and Elections Act, specifically with the implications for your committee. So the annual report, so the Improvement Plan Part 2, as you're aware, is part of the local government measure that's being repealed with the introduction of the Local Government and Elections Act. So this is the final year in which we'll be producing the report in this format. The report sets out the extent to which the council has met our wellbeing objectives and the progress that we are making towards achieving the national wellbeing goals for Wales. It contains a series of information that has previously largely been reported to scrutiny committees through the quarterly reporting cycle, and it also gives you an end of year position in terms of the regulatory report proposals that have been made, as well as the head of internal audit opinion of the council and the council's annual governance statement. So it's an important document that brings all of those things together. Councils considered this report largely because of the requirement to consider the end of year performance, and the report sets out our progress towards meeting the wellbeing objectives, and the corporate plan had an overall status of amber at the end of the year. Within the remit of your committee, Chair, the regulatory recommendations are particularly important, and section 7, which is highlighted in the report, provides you with the content of Audit Wales's annual audit summary for 2020, which were generally positive and concluded that overall the council was meeting its statutory requirements in relation to continuous improvement. Members will be aware that we have a process in the Vale of Glamorgan whereby when we receive reports from Audit Wales, we report the findings alongside the proposed actions to the relevant scrutiny committee, to your committee chair, and also to Cabinet. So this report in section 7 wraps up the end of year position in terms of proposals for improvement that have been made both through a series of local reviews undertaken by Audit Wales, but also the national studies that the Council is required to consider and respond to as well. And the way in which we do that internally is by a monthly meeting of the Insight Board, where we have a tracker for the progress being made against those regulatory proposals for improvement and the local actions that we're taking. And the end of year position is highlighted in that report as well. And then just finally, in terms of a brief overview, the third element of bringing the report to your committee this evening is that next year we'll see the production of the first self-assessment report for the council under the Local Government and Elections Act. We've had discussions through a series of scrutiny committees, Chair, with members requesting a bit of information in terms of what are the practical implications and changes that will make. And the report to Cabinet that was referred on to Council and latterly to yourselves has some information in paragraph 2.35, which is a timetable highlighting the proposed changes. And the ones that I just wanted to flag was the fact that legislation now provides for an increased role for your committee in terms of scrutinising performance. And notably, there'll be the September report of the annual report, and that's prior to full council, giving the Governance and Audit Committee the ability to make recommendations to Cabinet of their consideration of the annual report, and that would then be referred on to full council. So it'll come in a slightly different order next year, Chair. And also then in March next year, we'll be bringing the annual delivery plan for the organisation. So the forward-looking response to that self-assessment to your committee in March as well. So really an end of year wrapping up, much of which you've seen previously, but bringing for final oversight this evening, Chair.
Okay, thank you for that, Tom. Do we have any questions or comments from members? I can see that. Sorry, my computer's a bit slow. Mr. Lewis.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'm just looking at the page 109. It is, Tom, if you would like to refer to the document. I'm rather confused by this 90% planning appeals dismissed. Can you give me a bit more information regarding that, please? Hello?
Sorry, Mr. Lewis, bear with me. I'm just trying to get to page 109 of the
109,
pack.
yeah. On the left-hand side, halfway down in the green box, it says 90% of planning appeals dismissed. Now, I presume that means appeals, not applications, but could you give me some background, please?
Certainly. I'll, if it's okay with you, Mr. Lewis, I'll take that one away and make sure that I provide the committee and obviously yourself with the details of that. But when I'm reading it, it's the fact that they're being in effect shown as being successfully dealt with. But I'm gonna I'll check with my colleagues in planning if that's okay, and I'll come back to you on that one. Yeah,
I'd just like some context on that, please, because it seems like an awfully big number to me. It may well be right, but the context might, the context in which I'm reading it might be wrong, you see. Okay, thank you.
Of course, Mr. Lewis, I'll do that for you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Tom. Councillor Johnson.
Sorry, Chair, I was just going to respond to Paul's comments because I'm a member of the planning committee and we get a monthly update on the number of planning appeals which are dismissed. The context here is that obviously if somebody, if an applicant is unhappy with the decision that's made by either the committee or the officers, then they're able to appeal to the planning inspectorate, and our response rate, as in the amount of which the committee or the officer decision is regarded as correct by the inspectorate is around 90%. There's not that many that go to appeal. There's a couple each month, but I think the planning department are fairly happy with their performance on that basis.
Okay, do we have any other questions or comments from members? I don't see anybody, so if we note the report then, as this is a reference from council, and have our comments fed back into the system. Mr. Lewis.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. I was trying to respond then to Councillor Johnson.
Sorry, yeah, no, carry on.
Yeah, and I would like to say to Tom now, you needn't do any more on that, Tom, because what Councillor Johnson said was exactly what I wanted, really. How many a month are we looking at? And it looks like the reject rate is only about 10%. So that sort of fills in the context for me. So thank you for that, Ian. And Tom, you needn't do anything else. Okay, thank you.
Perfect.
Thank you very much, Councillor Johnson.
Perfect. If we note the report then and move on to the next item, which is the audit of the 2020-21 financial statements.
Shall I just start with this one, Chair, yeah, and then pass over to colleagues who've got more information on it. Committee members will remember that they saw the draft statement of accounts at your last meeting on the 20th of July. And at that time, we said that they'd been submitted to Audit Wales and that they were obviously subject to audit. Audit have now substantially completed that work. And you'll see in the paperwork tonight a copy of the final statement of accounts together with the report that Audit Wales have written with regards to the Vale of Glamorgan accounts for the last financial year. I'd also draw your attention to the fact that the annual governance statement is attached as well at the end of the statement of accounts. Again, you saw this as a draft statement back in your July meeting, and I recall informing committee that this remains a live document until such time as the statement of accounts is finally signed off. So you have the current annual governance statement there as well tonight. So that was all I was going to say. I think Steve is actually going to talk you through their findings as detailed in Appendix B of the report.
Yes, hand over to Steve.
Okay, thank you, Caris. Thank you, Chair. Hello. Good evening, everyone. Yes, our report is here today present for your attention. And this report summarises our findings from the audit, our audit of the council's accounts. But it's important to note when I mention the council's accounts, this is the first year, of course, when the council is producing group accounts, which consolidate the activities, the financial transactions and the assets and liabilities, etc., the closing position of Big Fresh Catering Limited. So throughout the report, you can see reference to the council and the group, but that's what we mean by the group, just to explain that up front. As per usual, those of you who've been on the committee for some time will know that this report is here this evening to help inform your decision as to whether you wish to recommend that the full council approves the accounts on the 11th of October when it meets and considers the accounts. So with all of this in mind, I'll take you through the main points of the report now. I'm happy to take any questions then at the end of the session, running through the report. There's various aspects within the report. I'll just take you through the main elements, really, which I feel are the most relevant to inform your decision. And the first section I want to draw your attention to is COVID-19, as it's labelled up. Unsurprisingly, the pandemic has continued to have quite a big impact, well, a very big impact on our audit work and how we undertake our audit work. In addition to that, it continues to have a big impact on how the council undertakes its work, including finance officers. But despite these challenges, officers have produced good quality draft accounts and also provided excellent support and engagement to the audit process. So I think it's a good opportunity really this evening now just to relay those thanks to officers in terms of the support they provided, which has made our life a lot easier and provided a quick turnaround of queries, good engagement, and yeah, thank you. So let's just pass that on really at this juncture. Moving on to the audit opinion section of the report. You will be pleased to know that we intend to issue an unqualified audit report, and a copy of that report is at Appendix 2 of the report. And the Auditor General will, subject to Council approval of the accounts, sign the accounts on the 12th of October. Whilst the opinion is unqualified, I need to alert you that there is an emphasis of matter paragraph included within our audit report concerning the valuation uncertainty, which has been expressed by your external valuers on certain land and building assets. Just to stress, this is still an unqualified opinion, and you'd recall a similar emphasis of matter paragraph in last year's accounts. So just to reiterate then, the same point was made last year, and this is due to uncertainty over property valuations as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, as opposed to any issues in regard to the council or any concerns in regard to the council. The other thing to add, of course, here is that the council aren't alone regarding this. A number of other local authorities are also facing, including emphasis of matter paragraphs in their audit reports. The next section of the report talks about significant issues arising from the audit. You will clearly see that it's quite a brief section, but that's just a reflection, really, the fact there aren't any significant issues arising, to be honest. That said, there have been some audit adjustments that have been made to the financial statements as a result of our audit, and I'll take you through those very shortly. I'll take them through right away, actually. Appendix 1 of the report and 2 just cover the letter of representation that the council will sign and submit to us to support the accounts. And the other appendix includes our audit report. So if we take you forward then to Appendix 3, which includes a summary of our audit adjustments. And these reflect the adjustments that have been made to the accounts as a result of our audit. There's 2 in particular, the most significant ones, which are at the top of that table there, which I'll comment on. The first of which talks about Note 16 and in regard to property, plant and equipment. And this relates to the issue I was just referring to. Because during our audit, it became apparent that the valuer, following a series of clarifications and inquiries with the valuer, had not lifted the valuation uncertainty that they attached to the valuations undertaken last year. There was a bit of confusion over this at one stage, but clarity was obtained and the valuer did not lift that valuation uncertainty. As a result, some narrative has been included in the accounts now to communicate that valuation uncertainty, and our emphasis of matter paragraph within the audit report cross-references to that particular note to draw the reader's attention to that valuation uncertainty. The second one I want to draw your attention to is the inventory balance note. The inventory in old language is stock, so the inventory stock balance. That exists on the balance sheet, but it's been reduced by some £5.3 million because it incorrectly included some PPE stocks, and this is not property, plant and equipment, this is personal protective equipment stocks that the council was holding for various third-party bodies, so it didn't warrant inclusion within the council's accounts. There's been no impact on the bottom line as a result of this adjustment, so I fully understand this is quite a big figure, so you might think, hang on, this is going to have an impact on balances, for example, but it does not. It's just an adjustment to the balance sheet. There's a series of other adjustments detailed within that appendix. I don't intend to talk about them in any detail, but there's changes to the officer remuneration disclosures. There's some classification changes within net cost of services within the comprehensive income and expenditure statement. There's been adjustments as a result of some changes in the apportionment of assets and liabilities in regard to the city deal. And finally, there's been some adjustments as a result of the audit of Big Fresh Limited, which has an impact then on the consolidated group accounts included within these financial statements. So I'll stop there, but I'm very happy to take any questions you might have on the report or any other aspect of the audit.
Okay, I can see that Councillor Wilson has indicated he wishes to speak. So, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you very much, Chair. And can I thank the team, in particular the audit team, for, again, another excellent report. And really, I mean, given the fact we've had COVID, given the fact that, you know, these officers are under huge pressure, produce these accounts on time and to a really high degree of accuracy. And to be honest, if you look at Appendix 3, you know, there are errors which, to be honest, I mean, if you think about the PPE error, that's a simple error to make. And I think they were being probably quite cautious and prudent in their estimation of the stock. And admittedly, you know, by including that, you think to yourself, well, they've only been careful here. I think that's, you know, it's easy to benefit from hindsight, isn't it, really, on that one? And I was thinking also, obviously, property, plant, equipment, again, it's something that, you know, obviously we do need to be considering. It is a difficult one because plant and equipment valuation must change quite a lot. And I should imagine one of the things that I would be interested in is the depreciation policies and what is the view of Audit Wales about looking for consistent depreciation policy across all councils here, and along with some sort of compatibility to the private sector, because there are various different policies that we could use with depreciation. And I think, you know, we need to be thinking about that a bit more. So I'd be interested in your view about those two matters. So thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. In regard to depreciation, we obviously audit depreciation, both in terms of the policies in place, are they appropriate, but also in terms of the calculations. But the other aspect and we, you know, we got no issues in regard to either of those aspects. But the other issue, so to conclude on that particular point, the council are compliant with the SIPFA Code of Practice. And the other aspect then to bear in mind here is that, which I think is good context for members to be aware of, is that depreciation, whilst a requirement to account for it appropriately, doesn't actually impact on your bottom line figures of your financial position. So, you know, I think that's useful context for you to be aware of, really, in terms of, and as part of me answering that particular question.
Okay, thank you for that, Steve. Mark, are you happy with that?
Yeah, I'm happy with that response. Thank you.
Fantastic. I don't see anybody else with their hand raised. I'll give you all one final opportunity, although I think that probably says a lot about the, sorry, Mr. Lewis.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I didn't know if we were finished with this item on the agenda yet, but what I wanted to refer to, and perhaps Caris could help us with this. I read through this afternoon, and I can't find the page now, but there's a referral in here to using the future use of operating leases as part of the balance sheet. And I'd just like to be reassured, really, that this is purely an accounting procedure and that it won't have any impact on the financial situation of the council, really. I think that's the case, but I'd like Caris, if she wouldn't mind, to try and explain that to me.
We do actually have another agenda item specifically on this. I think it's the next one on the agenda, actually, Chair, to explain where we're going with this in particular. But I don't know whether Gemma wants to answer the technical question about the impact on the accounts.
Well, and there may be timing issues, but certainly it's not intended to hit the bottom line of the balance sheet. So any asset that we were building in on the balance sheet will be offset by a liability. So it's a notional adjustment to the balance sheet.
Yes,
okay.
Thank you for that. I thought that was the case. I just wanted some reassurance. Thank you.
Okay, do we have any other questions or comments? Right, I think that's probably a reflection on the accounts themselves, actually. But if we move on to the recommendation then, which is to approve, I think that we'd all be in favour of that. Don't see any dissent.
So, Chair, could we have a seconder? That's all.
I second that, Gareth and Chair.
Yes, I don't see any dissent, and I would echo Mark's comments about the team in pulling this together. It's a big job, and thank you for doing everything and getting it done on time as well. And if we move on then to the next item, which is the implementation of the IFRS 16.
Okay, thank you very much. It's okay, I can take that. So I think I have mentioned in committee previously the introduction of the accounting standard IFRS 16, and we have been talking about it for a number of years, and it's been delayed for various reasons, the most recent one being COVID. We have now been advised that it will be implemented on the 1st of April 2022, and there will be no further delays. So I suppose in a nutshell, the standard will mean that for any asset that we have the use of through a lease or other contract, we will need to potentially, subject to various tests, build in an asset on the balance sheet, which we will need to write down over the life of the asset or the arrangement. And we will also need to build in a liability, and those lease payments will need to be split into the principal repayment and the interest part of the payment. This means that any new lease arrangements will need to go through the capital programme, so that will be a change for us. And I think I've split down the implications of this into 5 key areas. So we've got our known leased assets, such as Victoria Primary School or Hengolig. We've also got the standard extends to potentially where we have contracts that give us the right to use an asset where we have consistency around that asset and control around that asset. So it's not necessarily just a kind of neat pure leasing arrangement. So we do need to examine all our contracts for potential IFRS 16 implications. We also, under the standard, need to value any assets that we lease for a peppercorn or nil consideration. So that's another piece of work that needs to be done. There are some considerations as part of the standard. So leases expected to fall below a low value policy do not need to be built in on the balance sheet, but we will need to add disclosure into the accounts around them. So we still need to gather that information. And there's also an arrangement around any leases on go live date, so on the 1st of April 2022, that have less than 12 months to run as part of that arrangement. So we had done quite a lot of work prior to COVID hitting, but we now are in the position where we need to do quite a bit more work, and we need to get some valuations. We've identified a lot of leasing arrangements in schools, mostly that will fall below the low value leasing policy, which we hope to set at £10,000. And we now also need to do a bit more work around embedded leases. So looking at those contracts where it could be considered there is a right of use asset that we need to evaluate as to whether or not that needs to be built in on the balance sheet or not. So there is quite a lot of work still to be done, but as I say, it's not expected to hit the bottom line of the accounts, although there could be some timing differences as part of the accounting arrangements. But it's more to bring the report to committee to flag it that this standard is being implemented. We'll need to do an impact assessment by the 31st of March 2022. And we can certainly bring further updates as we go towards implementing the standard. It will be quite a big change to our accounts, but shouldn't impact the bottom line. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you for that, Gemma. I can see that Councillor Wilson wishes to speak. So, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you very much, Chair. I mean, as you probably realise, Victoria School is actually in my ward. I share with Councillor Burnett and Victoria School. And obviously, we know there is a lease there. And obviously, that lease has got a limited one. And I just wondered perhaps how we will reflect that limited one in the accounts. You know, so will that value continue to go down as obviously we're getting towards the end of that lease? And also, how do we show any sort of benefit in terms of the lease if we got a relatively low lease? If it was a commercial property, for instance, on the commercial basis, I'd be interested to see how the accounting adjustments would work in that term, because obviously some of those leases would be quite low in value, and if they were open in the open market. But also, we also need to reflect, of course, that some of those leases have a big obligation upon the organisation, e.g. in this case the Vale Council, to bring the property into a good condition. And it's often, in many ways, in terms of a low cost lease, that we're incumbent upon actually making necessary improvements or remedy any defects of the building itself. So I'd be interested to see how we're going to be doing this in terms of the balance sheet, because I should imagine there will be two sides of it, not just the asset side, but the liability side that we need to put into place. So I'd be interested to see any sort of modelling going forward on this.
Okay, Chair, through you, my understanding is that the RICS guidance for the valuers is still being pulled together. So whilst we have had initial discussions with an external valuer, we haven't yet had formal valuations done. This standard only applies to arrangements where we lease a property. The arrangements for accounting arrangements for where we lease out properties will continue to be the same. So, I mean, in terms of impact, it's something that we're still working on in terms of the value that we'll be building on in terms of assets and liabilities at the moment.
Okay, thank you for that,
Yeah,
Jared.
can I respond
Yes,
to that, if please? I just wondered perhaps if we can have a further update on this. So when we're looking at examples or case studies, such as the school, for example, I mentioned, doesn't have to be that, it could be another place, so that we can run this through. I just wondered perhaps we can have a look at this and maybe get some advice from Audit Wales or maybe some other examples, maybe outside the authority.
Chair, happy to bring an update back. Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, thank you for that, Gemma.
Can I make a recommendation that we do that, in fact? Thank you.
Yes, of course. I'm happy to second that, and we'll take that at the end of the item, assuming committee is agreed with that. Steve, I think you'd like to come in at that point.
Yes, well, thank you, Chair. Just responding to Councillor Wilson, really. Obviously, this is going to be a big issue across the whole of the Welsh public sector when it's introduced. And so it's obviously going to rise in prominence as a key audit issue we'll be tackling as we get nearer to 2022 and 2022-23 accounts when it's actually reported in your financial statements. So obviously that's a little bit down the road, isn't it? But obviously it is something that's going to raise in prominence, and without doubt it's going to be something we'll be looking at, and also looking at the degree of consistency and how that's been adopted rather by the various other local authority bodies.
Okay, thank you for that, Steve. Do we have any other questions or comments from members? I don't see anybody, so if we move on to the recommendations then. Firstly, the recommendation, as set out in the papers, is to note the contents of the report. I'll propose that, if I could have a seconder, please.
Second, Chair.
And I'm assuming we're all agreed on that for obvious reasons. And also then Councillor Wilson's proposed recommendation, which I've seconded, that is a further update be brought forward to committee on that in due course. I note Gemma's agreement to that. Are we all agreed on that as well? I take that silence as agreement, so thank you for that, Gemma. And if we move on to the next item, which is the review of fraud and governance as part of the external audit.
Thank you, Chair. I'll introduce this one. This is another element of the end of year audit that Audit Wales undertake in relation to our accounts. So what we are required to do is outline for them how the council identifies and responds to any risks of fraud. So what you have in front of you at Appendix A is our response back to Audit Wales on the questions that they ask as part of this process. This has been as I said, this has been submitted to Audit Wales. They've had a look at it as part of their closure of accounts process. I don't know whether Steve would want to comment on, make any comments on what they've done as part of that work.
Steve.
Okay. Thank you, Carys. I think you summed it up quite nicely, to be honest, Carys. It's basically, fraud is a key feature of our audit. You know, we need to consider fraud and the implications of fraud and whether it could generate any material misstatements within the financial statements. One aspect of by which we assess fraud is by obtaining certain assurances from management and those charged with governance. And this response is on the which we've had from management, from Carys and colleagues, is on the agenda today because for information partly, but also to give you the opportunity to review and consider those responses to see if they accord with your understanding of the council. Because, as I say, the responses we need are not only from management, we need responses in a sense from councillors, from members, being those charged with governance of the council. So that's why it's on the agenda today, and to give you the opportunity to consider those responses and actually let us know as the external auditors whether you're satisfied with those responses and they reflect your understanding of the council.
Okay, thank you for that, Steve. Do we have any questions or comments from members? Again, I don't see anybody, so I will take that to mean that everybody is satisfied with the responses as set out. Our recommendation on this is that we consider the contents of the report, and that shall be taken as the view of the committee. I propose that. Do we have a seconder? Could somebody second that, please?
I'll second that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Drake, and I think we're all agreed on that. So if we move on to the next item, which is item 8 and the Corporate Risk Register Q1 update.
Thank you, Chair. With your permission, I'll give you an overview of this report. So this, as you say, is the Q1 Risk Register update for yourselves. And there are 16 corporate risks included in the registers. There have been no further additions in Q1. 5 of them have scored a medium high and 11 risks have scored a medium status during the first quarter. There has been some movement in the risk statuses, which we're seeing largely to be attributed to the ongoing coronavirus pandemic and or the impact of Brexit. And it's the multifaceted nature of those two issues which are having an impact across many of the aspects on the risk register itself. In terms of the direction of travel for the risks, the majority have maintained a static position during Q1, with the exception of the deprivation of liberty safeguards, safeguarding, WICIS and the workforce risks. And what we've tried to do, Chair, is reflect in the report some of the comments and questions that were raised by your committee at the end of year report that I brought. And we've gone away and done some specific work around some of those. So the first of that is around the deprivation of liberty safeguards risk, which has decreased in Q1 from a medium-high status to a medium status. And the report sets out some of the rationale for doing that, which is largely down to the significant progress in progressing the outstanding authorisations. And that's enabled officers to recommend that that risk is reduced to a medium status. And there'll be further watching brief on that as the new legislation comes into force. The second is around the workforce risk, which we're seeing as heightening in the quarter. So that's increased from a 4 to a 6. It's still at a medium status, but showing that escalation reflects the impact that the pandemic and Brexit has had on some aspects. And there's a detailed analysis within the report showing you some of the particular implications that risk is having. We've also proposed increasing the safeguarding risk from a 3, so a medium low, to a 4, so a medium status on the register. And that's really reflecting how the nature of that risk has changed during the pandemic in terms of driving up some of the issues that we see around safeguarding in both children and young people and adults. And again, there's a detailed commentary within the report for members to consider. The Welsh Community Care Information System, known as WCIS, there are nationally known issues with the performance of that particular system, and that's driven the status up from medium to a medium-high status on the register. Again, those issues are highlighted in the report, but the Senior Management Board, which is the board with partners from all of the organisations using that system, are meeting with the provider called Advance to try and tackle some of those issues. But it was considered by the risk owner that was worthy of increasing that one. And then looking forward, as the register does each quarter in terms of a forecast direction of travel for each of the corporate risks on the register, predominantly they remain the same. We're seeing that the integrated health and social care risk is still continued to forecast to decline, and that the reshaping environmental sustainability and welfare reform risks are still anticipated to continue over time. In terms of waste, we're seeing that will be maintaining its heightened medium-high status, and that's reflecting the ongoing financial pressure and workforce pressures that are associated with a reduced supply of LGV and HGV drivers. We are starting to see some issues within the school reorganisation and investment risk associated with the 21st Century Schools programme. That's largely down to supply issues and the escalating cost of material associated with Brexit. So that has the potential to impact on the deliverability of Band B of that particular programme. Councillor Wilson is indicating, Chair. I don't know if you wanted me to pause at that point.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much for your work on this, Tom, and the team. I know it's very much a team approach, but I do think there's an issue at the moment which is very serious, and that's the rise in energy costs. In particular, the gas prices are, as you know, are going up exponentially at the moment, and obviously it may have a serious implication for the council. And I just wondered, perhaps, we need to be thinking about mitigating this as a risk, because obviously gas consumption will be high, especially if we're going towards the winter. And I'm just wondering, perhaps we could consider this as having an impact. I mean, I note the fact with waste management, we have got issues with that, notably the garden waste, but nevertheless, that issue is not necessarily going to go away, and it is going to be a major challenge going forward on managing waste. I mean, we haven't fortunately gone as bad as some other neighbouring authorities, like I know not far away from us. One authority is now looking at monthly collections of garden waste, for example. But clearly, I know we're going towards the end of that period, but nevertheless, going forward, we do need to make sure that we can increase that resilience of that service. And I think in terms of integration of health and social care, I think obviously there are concerns, rapidly aging population, and there will be pressing demands for more and more integrated care as our population gets older and older, thanks to the lovely baby booming generation, are now all reaching retirement and beyond that as well, into quite old age. So I think this is something that we do need to seriously think about. I mean, I think you're right about deprivation of liberty and safeguard, but it's not going to go away, because again, it's the older generation are going to suffer from that, because obviously a lot of the diseases relate to deprivation, liberty and safeguard, or things like dementia, for example, and clearly that's not going to go away either. So, these things are pressing, and, and I think the council, that is right to look at those, but I wonder perhaps we do need some more high level discussions on especially about rising energy prices and what we can do as a council to protect ourselves from that. But thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. And with your permission, Chair, may I suggest that that's a really good example of one of the cross-cutting issues that the organisation is facing. And you'll be aware that since March of 2020, the senior leadership team has been meeting on a frequent basis in its form of SLT Gold, so the Gold command structure, to manage the response to the coronavirus pandemic. Within the last month, we've moved that meeting now to be focusing on a series of issues that the council is facing. So one of which is obviously the ongoing pandemic, but also looking at some of the emerging implications associated with Brexit, and some of the higher level issues that are aligned, such as workforce implications. And I think Councillor Wilson's comments around energy prices are a good example of one of the almost symptoms of a number of different drivers. And perhaps with permission, the committee, if you were minded to make a recommendation that we do some focused work around that within the context of the environmental sustainability risk. That's probably where it may sit best in terms of expressing it on the register, but we can certainly explore how those issues are starting to impact, and certainly within the ageing population and the implication that has on our social services department. That's very much seen as one of the key aspects within that integrated health and social care risk. So absolutely, we can take that forward.
Okay, can I thank you for your comments, Tom, and again, very helpful. And I'm just thinking perhaps if I can make those two sort of recommendations there, when we do have a sort of further update on, as you rightly said, put it in the environmental sustainability mark, as it were, to try and to mitigate the impact of high energy prices. And the other thing is, as you rightly said, the integration of health and social care, given our rapid ageing population. And I think perhaps, if we can get a bit more work on that, that would be very useful for subsequent with register report. So thank you.
I'm happy to second both of those recommendations as well. Mark, do we have any other questions or comments from members? I don't see any. I do have one question, Tom, and it's just in relation to workforce needs. I note the forecast direction of travel is to remain static on that. Is that because you foresee the labour shortages becoming less of an issue moving forward?
The consideration that we had at senior leadership team on that, Chair, was that we wanted to heighten the risk during Q1, and the report sets out a series of both the implications but also the mitigating actions that are being taken. And the conversation that we had was in the round, considering that the proposed mitigations that are set out in the report, such as looking at the attraction strategy, looking at how we can make short-term use of redeployment, that kind of thing, will keep it at that particular level. So we wouldn't anticipate it at this stage increasing further. The workforce risk or issue around workforce, though, is one of the key considerations that we are keeping an eye on a fortnightly basis. So at the moment, not seeing it rise any further than the heightened level that we've put it at, but obviously subject to change.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's imperative that we do keep a close eye on that, particularly because it's impacting on residents who see this happening on a regular basis, whether it's garden waste collections or indeed the issues with school bus timetables in various parts of the authority as well. Appreciate that it's a national issue that does limit what you can do about it, but obviously it does have implications for the services we provide, and therefore it's important that we monitor it closely and take mitigating actions as best as we can. Okay, thank you for that. Do we have any other questions or comments from members? Well, if we move on to the two recommendations that were proposed by Councillor Wilson for more focused attention to both the impact of energy prices and health and social care, I seconded those, so I don't see any dissent, so I think we're all happy to agree on that. And our other recommendation is to note the contents of the report. I think we've done that, so I'll propose that, and I think if somebody could just second as well.
Second that, Chair.
And I think we can all agree unanimously on that as well. And if we move on then to the National Fraud Initiative update.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take that one. Good evening. This report is highlighting the progress made to date on the latest National Fraud Initiative exercise. Members will be aware that this is a biannual exercise coordinated in Wales by Audit Wales in collaboration with equivalent bodies in England, Scotland and Northern Ireland. Participating organisations such as other local authorities, DWP, the police, housing associations, etc. submit data to the National Fraud Initiative and then it is matched against other data sets using specific criteria. Reports containing potential matches are released to each organisation to investigate. However, it's important to note that where a match is found, it is not in itself evidence of fraud. It may be an error or an inconsistency that requires further investigation, or it prompts the service area to update their records and/or improve their systems. Therefore, data was extracted from the council systems for this latest exercise in October 2020, and 3,130 potential matches were released back to the council in January 2021. Appendix A gives a breakdown of the current position. You can see at Appendix A, of the 3,130 matches received, 2,755 matches have been processed to date and closed, while work is ongoing on the 375 remaining matches. To date, £1,979 has been identified as recoverable. However, there have been other results. 173 blue badges have been cancelled and 219 applicants have been removed from the housing waiting list. Whilst these results do not provide a recoverable value to the council, the Cabinet Office also provides a basis on which notional savings can be calculated. And Appendix A identifies the Cabinet Office estimated notional savings figure amount of £810,401. The Cabinet Office methodology is also explained at Appendix A. In addition, the single person discount is an annual exercise, and this matches highlight where there may be more than one adult at a location in receipt of single person discount. Appendix B shows that a total of 3,314 households have been identified for review within the 2021 exercise, and to date 2,572 have been closed. Of the 742 that remain open, 549 have been identified for further investigation and 193 still require an initial review. Therefore, work is ongoing on all the remaining NFI matches. I'd like to just inform committee that the corporate investigation investigating officer is coordinating the approach to ensure that the recovery is maximised and that data is cleansed and any identified weaknesses in systems and processes are identified and referred to internal audit, who can then assist in improving systems and processes. So whilst they may not necessarily be much actual fraud or actual money recovered, I think it provides assurance that as these exercises continued over a number of years, our data is becoming cleaner and our processes and procedures are there to prevent fraud happening. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you for that, Joan. Do we have any questions from members? I don't see anybody indicating they wish to speak, so if we move on to the recommendation that we give due consideration to the report, I think we've done that, so thank you for that, Joan. If we move on then to the next item, which is the progress against the internal audit risk-based plan.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll take that one as well. This is a familiar report that I'd like you to talk you through the progress that has been made against the internal audit plan to date. The purpose of the report is to provide you with a position statement on the progress which you against the plan that you approved in July. Progress made against the approved plan for the period 1st of April to the 1st of August is attached to Appendix A. Obviously, you're familiar with this format, which details the status of each planned review, the audit opinion, and the number of any high, medium, or low priority recommendations made to improve the overall control environment. You can see that as at the 31st of August, 10 items of work have been completed, of which 6 audits have resulted in an opinion being provided. A further 2 audits have been completed and draft reports issued, which are awaiting feedback from service departments. A total of 12 audits are currently ongoing, another 8 have been allocated to auditors and should be commenced shortly. Therefore, based on the assessment of the strengths and weaknesses of the areas examined through testing of the effectiveness of the internal control environment, an audit opinion of substantial assurance has been given to 1 completed audit and an opinion of reasonable assurance to 4 completed reviews. The other completed audit has been given a limited assurance opinion. This is the work that was done around the tender evaluation and award processes in building services. An explanation is provided to members at paragraph 2.4 of the report. Basically, improvements were recommended to ensure that the service would not be open to challenge, and recommendations included staff training involving professionals such as finance, legal and procurement colleagues at certain stages of the process to provide advice, and improvements around retention and checking of documentation. All recommendations were accepted and a follow-up audit in this area will be undertaken to ensure adequate progress is being made. The Appendix A also identifies that a total of 2 high priority, 13 medium priority and 15 low priority recommendations have been made. The high priority recommendations were in respect of the limited opinion audit report, and progress will be reviewed in the follow-up audit. The implementation of the remaining recommendations will be monitored as we move forward to ensure that progress is being made in all the recommendations made. That's all I'd like to say, but I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, do we have any questions or comments from members? I don't see anybody wishing to. Was that Mr. Lewis coming on there, or were you just turning? Yeah, Mr. Lewis.
Yes, no, I noticed that you mentioned in your report, Joan, the notional savings attributed to the blue badge, effectively, you know. Yeah. And I've just spotted within your basis of calculations and savings advice that there's a notional saving of £575 per annum allocated to a blue badge, on the basis that might be what people would pay in parking charges and things, you know. Personal opinion, I mean, I park always everywhere. I always pay if I have to, and I doubt if I spend more than £50 a year on parking fees. So £575 seems like an awful lot of money to me. That seems like over-egging it a bit, I think, but it's just my view. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'd just like to point out that there's a Cabinet Office calculation, and I think it's skewed because obviously London comes into that and other major cities. So it's a national figure that is bandied about. So I take your point in Wales, that is probably quite high. But when you take into account other large cities, that increases that average.
I see. I understand. If it's a national figure, then perhaps it's more acceptable. But certainly in our little corner of the Wales here, I don't remember ever spending £500 a year on parking fees ever. Thank you.
I think Mark would like to come in at that point.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to add to that, really, I think the notional figures are very indicative and based on a whole range of assumptions. So we tend to focus on the sort of recoverable figures, but it is useful just to mention them. But I take on board exactly what Mr. Lewis says, and we tend to focus on the recoverable figures, but we just use them because they are national figures that are bandied about, as Joan said as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Mark. Do we have any other questions or comments from members? I don't see anybody, so if we note the progress made and the contents of the report, I think we can all obviously agree on that. So if we move on to the forward work programme. You're on mute, Mark.
There we go. Elementary error again. Just to take committee through this particular item, it's obviously the regular report that you get in terms of the forward work programme. It's just the table on page 3 of the report, which indicates the items that we've currently got scheduled for the meeting on the 13th of December. So anything brought forward by our external audit colleagues, progress against the internal audit plan. We hope to bring a suite of updated counter-fraud policies for members' consideration at the next meeting as well, and the corporate risk register. But there may be other things that will find their way through by December. So just for members' information. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Mark. Are there any issues any members would like to raise in relation to the work programme? I can't see anybody. So if we agree to that item as well then, and obviously note the contents of the work programme. I haven't got any items under either part 1 or part 2, so thank you everybody for attending this evening. Hope you have a good evening and look forward to catching up soon. Nice to see you all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.